everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, 8 Paths to Special Education Teacher Leadership. It will be presented today by Dr. Belva Collins. Don't forget that everyone attending today will get a CE certificate within their transcript section of their EdWeb profile. That should appear within the next day of watching the webinar. And as always, please join our community, teaching all students practical strategies for inclusive classrooms, stay up to date with our resources, upcoming webinars, and any other discussions we have. We are going to be doing a 20% off discount code. You can use this code on our website, brookspublishing.com. You'll get 20% off your purchase. The code is edWebinar, and that is good till December 31st. And we'll be doing a giveaway today. We'll be giving away 3 copies of 8 Paths to Leadership. So be sure to stay active in the chat, and we will select 3 winners randomly and announce it at the end right after the Q&A. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Collins.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm really excited about doing this webinar with you because leadership is something that I think is really important for all of you to develop. And I'm assuming that most of you are classroom teachers, or if not, are preparing to be a classroom teacher in special education. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about myself. And I was a classroom teacher. I worked in a rural area and did this for several years. I worked in low incidence disabilities, so students that had severe disabilities. And then after I was a teacher, I went to the University of Kentucky and to be a professor and then chair that department. And later I went to UNC Charlotte, University of North Carolina at Charlotte, to also be a professor and chair that department. And while I was a professor, I also supervised student teachers and supervised practicum students. I want to tell you a little bit some of the other areas of leadership that I have had myself. And one is that I was a member of the American Council on Rural Special Education, which is a national group. I was on their board and I chaired that group, and I edited their journal, Rural Special Education Quarterly. I also was active with the Higher Education Consortium for Special Education and was a board member and treasurer for them. I got a few awards for leadership, and one was a Lifetime Service Award from the American Council on Rural Special Education. And that was 3 years ago, and then 2 years ago, last year actually, I was the North Carolina Teacher Educator of the Year. And I published a lot of articles, a lot of chapters, and some books. And one of the books is the basis for this presentation that we're doing now on leadership. So let's talk just briefly about why all teachers should be leaders. And I think leadership is the most important skill that a teacher could have once they learn how to teach. And one is because all of you have professional preparation that other people don't get. General educators do not know how to work with students with disability unless they took courses. Administrators may not know, peer tutors may not know, but you have that preparation. You're special because of that. You also have a wide body of knowledge about strategies and procedures, all about disabilities, and you have knowledge that other people may not have. You have experience. If you've been a classroom teacher for several years, then you have a lot of experience on being a special education teacher and what works and what does not work. If you are a student teacher or preparing to be a teacher, you're still getting that body of knowledge right now. I also believe that all people who get a calling to become a special education teacher have an empathy for the students they work with. They really care about people with disabilities and their lives and their families. And they may consider this to be their mission in life, to be the best teacher that they can be. Also, because of all of the things I've mentioned, you're always a resource. You're a resource for administrators, you're a resource for families, you are a resource for the community, and people can come to you when they don't know what to do in special education. And the final reason I think leadership is so important for you is that it is a standard. If you look at the Council for Exceptional Children standards, then leadership is right up there over and over again, mentioned across the standards that they said you should have as a professional. So the purpose of this webinar is to go over the 8 paths that I've identified as being pathways to leadership for teachers. And I could have written a book that was all about administrators and how to be a principal or a special ed director, but that wasn't the purpose. I really believe that you can be a leader without ever leaving your classroom, and that's what this book is all about. and the 8 different ways that you might do that. So here are the 8 ways listed, and we're going to go over each of these in a good overview as the webinar progresses. So I believe that the path for leadership could be on how to collect data and assessment and make decisions based on that data, how to make changes in your school and your district, how to mentor others that are coming into the profession, how to conduct professional development and consultations for families and for teachers, how to work effectively with the families of your students, how to support your students as they go through transition from birth all the way through adulthood, how to advocate for students on a local and national level, and how to connect with disability-related organizations so you become more effective as a leader. We'll talk about each of these different pathways, and I don't expect that all of you are going to be a leader in these areas, but I do expect that you're going to meet one of these objectives. First, I want you to reflect on which of these 8 paths that I just mentioned is the path to leadership that you think best suits your talents, your abilities, and your strengths. I'd like you to think about that, and by the end of the webinar, be able to select the path that you think that you really want to follow. I'd like you to be able to tell people why you think it's so important for you to have leadership in this area and to know some guidelines that will help you become a leader. So let's begin. Let's begin with the very first path that I have. Leadership path 1 is making database decisions, which is something that you as a special education teacher do on a daily basis with all the students. So why should you do this? Why should you be a leader in database decision making? Well, the reason we collect data is because we want to know that what we're doing works. So you want to know if you have challenging behavior in your classroom and you use a behavioral strategy, you want data to show that it's working or not working. If you're trying to teach content to your students and you're using an instructional procedure, you want to know if that's working or not working. And if what you're doing does not work, you want the data to tell you that, and so you can make adaptations. You can change the objective or you can change the procedure if you need to. If someone asks you why you use the procedures that you do when you're working with students, you should be able to pick up the data and show it to them and say because it works. And you should be able to justify that procedure to families, to staff, and to administrators. And you should be able to know when the objective is met. I know all of you collect IEP data, and you should be able to say that my instruction was effective and helped my students meet these standards or reach these IEP goals. Also, if you know that there is more than one way to teach and you're not sure which one you want to do, you should be able to collect data using both strategies and to decide which one worked the best. If you are teaching your paraprofessionals or peer tutors or general education teachers how to use strategies in special education, then you should be able to collect data on their performance and know if they're using those procedures correctly or not. Once you have data, you should be able to recommend procedures to others with a lot of confidence. And the final reason we collect data is because it is the law. We have to show that we are effective in what we do, and all the procedures that you're using should be either research-based or evidence-based, and the evidence being that there's a large body of research to support the procedure that you're using. So I'd like to, throughout this webinar, have you reflect at certain points. And if you have a paper and pencil handy, this would be a great time for you to pull that up and have it at hand. And what you want to do is to pause for just a moment, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to do this. But I want you to reflect on the assessment data that you collect on the students that you work with as a special education teacher. Think about, just jot down quickly as I give you a few moments, the kind of data you collect, who collects it, if it's always you or someone else in your classroom, whether you collect formative data as you teach or you wait until you're through teaching and do summative data, and which of those might be most important. Reflect on any baseline data that you might collect and why you do that, and how long you could collect data before you determine if a procedure is working or not working. Also reflect on the way that you display data and share it with families. And think, in the past, have you ever changed something that you do as a teacher based on the data that you collected? And have you ever taught someone else in your classroom to use a procedure and collected data to see if they were doing it correctly? And have you ever found that you need to individualize procedures based on the data? I'll give you just a few seconds to think this over. Hopefully you've jotted down one or two thoughts about data. And if more come to you as we proceed to talk about database decisions, go ahead and jot those down as well. We'll refer to these again at the end of the webinar. But let's think about this. If you are a special education teacher, this is what you should be doing in making database decisions. You should always be collecting baseline data before you ever teach anything, so that you know the starting point where your students are before you ever begin to teach standards or content or change behaviors. You should also collect data, as I mentioned, on your staff, on peer tutors, on general education teachers, anyone, families, that you are teaching to use a procedure to see that they're doing it correctly. And this is one big pet peeve that I have, is that often teachers don't collect data long enough to know if something's working or not. Many times I've done a consultation in a classroom and the teacher said, what you told me to do doesn't work. And I say, how do you know it doesn't work? And they say, well, I tried it for a day. Well, if you try something for one day, it probably doesn't work. So you should be able to collect data for at least 3 to 5 days before you think about changing what you're doing, to see if what you're doing doesn't click in and begin to work. On the data, you should be able to look at the progress of your students and see if the objective was appropriate. And if the student's making no progress, you can make decisions like maybe going to a different objective because they weren't ready for the one that you identified yet. Or you might think that the procedure that I'm using is not effective and I need to change procedures. If you have more than one procedure that works, you should be able to collect data on both of them and decide which one works the best. Look at how long it takes a student to meet criterion on something you're teaching with one procedure, and then try another and see if it's better with one over the other. And that will help you decide which strategy is the best for students. Also, realize that all the students that you have on your caseload may need different procedures. There are some students who will need physical guidance when you work with them, some that can follow verbal directions, some who want written directions or picture symbols, some who you may need to model for them and let them imitate what you do. So the data will tell you which of those methods is best for your students when you collect it. And we always want to graph our data. Many times when I'd see my student teachers, I'd walk in and say, where are the data? And if they only had 1 or 2 days, I was going to be a little upset with them, because it's important to graph your data 3 to 4 times a week, if not 5, so that you can see if the progress is being made that you want. So if you're following those guidelines on being a good database decision maker, then there are a few steps that you can go up to become a leader. So let's see, how might you be a leader in this area? First, if you want to be a leader on assessment, you have to stay current on the research. You need to know what behavioral procedures and instructional procedures have a good database behind them and that you should be using based on this. You want to make sure that you find this out from legitimate sources. So you want to look at the book that was published and where did it come from and who wrote it, and are they an authority? Or you want to attend a webinar where someone gives you some bio on the person you're listening to, or professional development that you know this is an authority. If you go online, you want to make sure that you have a legitimate source, that it's from a professional organization, or it is from someone who collects data for maybe a grant, but you just don't want to think that anything that you read online is going to be the truth. So know those legitimate sources. Then, once you have figured out what it is that works in your classroom, what it is that is recommended by authorities to use, then you should be able to share that with others to be a real leader in database decision making. You should be able to share strategies with the paraprofessionals in your classroom, with the peer tutors who may come in to work with the students, with general education teachers if you're doing inclusive services, with the support personnel, meaning your physical therapist or your speech language pathologist, and anyone else, a vision specialist, a behavioral specialist that comes in, These are people who may benefit from knowing some special ed procedures as you're learning procedures that they use. And the big one, the parents that need to know how to work with their students at home, that you can share your procedures with them and show all of these people how to collect the data and how to graph it so you know that they're being effective. Once you found out what is effective and what seems to work consistently with your students, then if you're going to be a real leader, you may think about sharing that with others through other forums. And it might be by doing presentations, maybe in your school or across the special ed teachers in your district, or it may be doing a publication like a newsletter that goes home for parents. So throughout this webinar, I'd like to highlight some teachers that I've worked with in the past years of my career and people who I thought were really good leaders. Most of these teachers have gone on to other positions now that I'll mention, but at the time that I watched them teach, I just thought they were really good at one of these paths to leadership. The first one I want to highlight is Carrie Creech Galloway. And Carrie often took student teachers in her classroom and practica students who were doing their field experiences. She collaborated with a lot of faculty from the university who wanted to do research and work with her students. And now Carrie has moved on to be a resource at her district level for teachers and students with low incidence disabilities. And she goes from classroom to classroom, making sure that teachers know how to collect data and how to make decisions based on that data. So when I interviewed Carrie, here are some things that Carrie said you should remember if you really want to be a leader in data-based decision making. She said all of her decisions as a teacher were based on data. And here are some of the questions that she always asked herself if it appeared that progress was not being made. She'd want to know if she was giving enough reinforcement for the correct responses. And sometimes she'd just forget to tell students they did a good job. Sometimes she found out that they needed more than just hearing good job, but a high five or a sticker or something, a privilege they might learn after they'd met an objective. She also asked herself if there was no progress. Was she teaching too much at one time, too many stimuli? So maybe if she was doing 10 spelling words, she'd need to cut it back to 5 because it was just overwhelming the student. She also thought, did she need to change the materials she was using? Maybe add some picture symbols or give some concrete materials. She thought about how she presented the content to the student, and maybe she needed to up that a little bit and not just tell a student what to do, but model it for them. She would ask herself also how the student communicated, and that maybe students knew the content she was teaching but didn't have a way to communicate that. So she always checked to make sure that they could select pictures, or they could use a communication device, or maybe they used manual signing if they couldn't communicate verbally. And if a student was making 2 errors, she pulled back and said, there's too many errors going on here. Something I'm doing is not correct. If I'm really a good teacher, students shouldn't make so many errors. So often she used prompts, and she'd sometimes use physical guidance. Sometimes she would prompt with models, sometimes prompt with verbal directions or written directions. And if she noticed that a student got stuck on a prompt level, so they always needed physical guidance. Think about when teaching a student to write, and you're always doing hand over hand, and they're not making progress to do it independently. She'd think about how could she get them closer to independence and how she could fade out that physical prompt and maybe fade in a prompt that was a model or a prompt that was a verbal direction instead. So those are some tips from Carrie that I thought would be helpful to you. We're going to move on now to the second leadership path. So if the last path is one you thought, oh, I already do this, but I'm not sure about the leadership part, think about what you could do on your school and with initiatives going on across your entire school where you have expertise that you might be able to share with that entire school. So here's why we might want, as a special education teacher, to affect school-wide change. I'm going to be saying this over and over again, but you have the knowledge base and you've been trained in special education. So you have knowledge and experiences in your classroom that other people in your school do not have if they're not in special education. You know how to implement and assess behavioral, data, and instructional procedures. You can teach, you can change behavior, and you can collect data on that. As a special education teacher, you've probably developed really good collaboration skills because you work with families and you work with related service personnel and you work with other special ed teachers. So you know how to collaborate with a team and you can use those skills for your entire school. Also, as a special education teacher, you know how to mentor and coach others. You coach your students. You mentor student teachers that come in your room. You mentor and coach the paraprofessionals that you work with. And you should be able to use that on a school-wide basis as well. You often co-teach as a special education teacher, and you often consult with other people on the best way to work with certain students. And so with your school, you should be able to branch out and co-teach with general ed teachers or consult with general ed teachers too. And a really important one to me is that you understand the curriculum. You know what a student needs if they need a functional curriculum that is life skills, daily living skills, and you know why that's important, but you also understand standards and content and what by law your students are required to learn. And you know how to put those both together so that you can teach core content, but you can make it meaningful to the student in their daily life. Or you can teach a daily functional skill and insert core content into that students need to learn. So this is why you would be a good person to affect school-wide change. So let's again pause to reflect. Think about your school. Has there been an initiative in your school that you were part of or you thought you should have been part of and weren't? It might have been that you want to move to more inclusive services in your school and district. Or it might be that you want to be a school that does positive behavioral support systems. Or it might be that your school is working on new ways to do response to intervention. I want you to think about if you were involved in the planning and the implementation of that most recent initiative. If you were, how? And if you weren't, why not? And if you were involved, what skills did you bring to the table that teachers really valued and that administrators valued? And in the end, was the initiative successful or not? So jot down for a few seconds. Why was that a successful initiative or why was it not? Hopefully you've got a few thoughts on that, and you may jot down a few more as we proceed. But if you are a person who wants to really work for school-wide change, these are the guidelines of things that you should be doing. Whenever there's an initiative that's announced for your school or for your district, or even for your state, you should do your homework and know what that initiative is all about. Exactly what is response to intervention, or exactly what is positive behavior support. Educate yourself and be familiar with what the research has to say about the initiative, what the procedures are that you might be doing in your school, and any law that backs it up. Then ask to be a part of the initiative from the very planning. Don't wait for it to be asked, but ask to be a part of that initiative. Use those collaboration and communication skills when you go to meetings that you've developed as a special ed teacher. And once an initiative is implemented, collect data to see if it's effective or not, especially with the students that are in your classroom that have disabilities. Share any data that you have with the administrators. So you should have formative data that you're collecting as the initiative is being implemented. And when you've finished implementing that initiative, summative data to see did it work or not work. And regardless of what the initiative is, always be sure that you're the advocate for special education, that you're making sure that your students fit into what's being done. An example of this might be a anti-bullying program in your school. And sometimes they think they can leave out the special ed students, but you'll say, oh, it's really important that our students know about this as well. All right, if you want to take it up a notch, how do you do that so that you become a real leader and not just part of that team? And what you want to do is to be proactive. Always volunteer for initiatives. Don't wait to be asked. Be able to tell administrators or people that are leading the initiative why it's important to have you on the team. Tell them about your expertise and your experiences. Tell them what resources that you can bring to meetings that other people might not have. And once you're made part of the team, make sure that you listen to other people that are on the team because they're going to have different backgrounds. And they may have expertise you don't have, just like you have expertise they don't have. And they may have different ways of teaching than you've been taught. So you're going to be really sharing with each other and trying to understand where both of you are coming from. Once the initiative gets going, politely but be sure that you do insist that data are collected on the effect of the initiative. We don't just say it seems to be working, but we actually have data to show us that it's working. And once you're part of that team, suggest that other stakeholders be part of the team as well. And that might be the parents of the students that you're teaching. It might be some of the support personnel you work with, like a speech therapist or a physical therapist. It might even be having a student with a disability on the team. But if you can do these things, then you're probably going to be a really good school-wide leader. I'll give you an example of someone I think is a great school-wide leader, and that's Sarah Stout-Heinrich. And Sarah was one of my students, and during that time, she was a secondary teacher, and she wanted to start a program to have more inclusive services for students with low incidence disabilities in the school where she taught. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But now Sarah has moved to the district level and is actually being a resource for many schools in her district on how to work with students with low incidence disabilities. So here are tips that come from Sarah. She says that when she taught in the high school, she worked really hard to make her students be an integral part of the high school, but they just weren't thought of as special ed students in that special ed classroom, but that people thought of them as kids first, as students first, and not students that happened to have a disability. She worked really hard with the counselor and with the regular ed teachers to move students into their classrooms so they could become a more integral part of general education. And after 5 years in that school, she had several of her students up to 40% of their day in the regular classroom environment. You know, the goal may be 100%, but she made progress from having none to having 40%. And she said the only way that she achieved this was through collaboration with general education teachers, and then providing training for her staff and her peer tutors that went out to inclusive classrooms on what their roles should be. So we'll move on from school-wide change. And this is something else you're going to have an opportunity to do within your classroom or informally through the school or maybe formally with the university. But that is mentoring others. Because of your skills as a special ed teacher, you are really a great mentor for students that are coming into the profession and for new teachers coming into the profession. So let's talk about why you should mentor other people. Again, you have that expertise and knowledge that other people don't have. You know about procedures and strategies that they don't have. You know how to mentor and coach because you've done that. You mentor the paraprofessionals in your classroom. You coach the students and paraprofessionals in your classroom. You may mentor and coach peer tutors. So you have skills that you can take out broader to other teachers. You know how to co-teach, how to consult. And I would like to believe that all of you have a great desire to mentor the next generation of upcoming teachers. And you understand that you have to really model good professional behavior yourself in order to be a good mentor for them. So if mentoring is something that interests you, reflect for just a moment. Reflect on the mentoring that you received. All of you at some point were either a student teacher, a practicum student, or you were a new teacher in special education in your building. And what kind of mentoring did you get? Was it effective or ineffective? All right, did the people who mentored you appear to be effective teachers? And why or why not? Did they use ethical procedures? Did they have really good examples they shared with you? Did they base what they did on the research? Can you think of examples where they were really good at what they did and why you would try to imitate their behavior as a mentor yourself? And can you also think of characteristics maybe they did that you would not want to imitate and why that would be? So I'll give you a few seconds to reflect and think about this. Right, hopefully you had some thoughts on that subject. So let's move on to the guidelines. Here's what good mentors do. Good mentors practice what they preach. So if you're going to ask anyone to do something, make sure that you know how to do it yourself. If you're going to tell them how to use a strategy, make sure you're fluent using that strategy and that you use it in front of them. If you tell them they need to be more reinforcing, Be reinforcing yourself as you're working with someone. Whenever you find strategies and procedures that work, keep a file and put those away so that you can share them at some future date. And any resource that you find, like a book or an online website, go ahead and keep that resource too. Make a list of websites, make a little library that you can share books. Whenever you start to mentor, make sure that you are establishing good rapport with your mentee. You don't just walk in and start telling them what to do or put them out there cold. You're going to get to know them a little bit and know what they're like and where they're coming from, what kind of background they have, if there may be cultural differences or communication differences you might have, and establish that rapport before you ever start working with them in the classroom. Once you're in the classroom, do side-by-side coaching. Don't just tell people what to do. Model it for them, work side by side, helping them do it until they can gradually take over from watching you as you coached. And then give them great feedback. Always tell what they do in a positive way well first. And then things that they need work on, you can suggest that later. All right, consider using technology because all of you are busy classroom teachers and it's hard to be everywhere at one time. You may have teachers tape themselves or video themselves, and then you can watch that with them and coach a little bit, give feedback with them. You can use live coaching like we're doing live broadcast right now. And if I can see you, I might be able to coach you in some behaviors, or you could coach me in behaviors. So think about using technology when you need to. You can even use the bug in the ear like I'm wearing right now so that you can talk to teachers. All right, you also want to document the mentoring after every session, and you'll want to tell what the teacher did well and what to work on in the future. And then recognize that you may want to meet outside of the classroom as well and talk over a cup of coffee or go out to a dinner together or just sit in the teacher's lounge or away from your students and talk a bit. And whenever you are privileged enough to have people in your classroom to mentor, realize that it's not just there to be help for you. It's probably more work for you because you're working with the students, being a good model at the same time that you're co-teaching and working with that person that you're mentoring. So if you've had experience with student teachers and with field experiences and working with novice teachers, how do we take that a little step higher? If you want to be a real leadership, here's what you want to do. Make sure that you practice on good mentoring skills. And you can do this by working with the peer tutors that come in your classroom or your paraprofessionals first and find out what works with them and then branch out to doing that with other teachers. All right, take the initiative. If there's a new teacher in your school, don't wait for the teacher to come to you, but volunteer to go work with that teacher, even informally, and say, if I can be a resource to you, let me do it. I've got experience, I can help you a bit. If you need it, just let me know. And when there are formal mentoring opportunities, volunteer. So if you happen to be a school where the special ed director or the principal appoints people to be mentors to new teachers, then volunteer. Let them know that you'd be interested in doing that. And if you think you'd really like to have student teachers and teachers from universities in your classroom, then contact the university and volunteer and say, I'd really love you to come see my classroom, see how it works, see the things that I do, and I think I'd be a good mentor to others if you'd like to place students with me. One of the people that I've worked with who is an excellent mentor to other teachers, and she has mentored probably hundreds, multiple teachers, just lots and lots of teachers, is Ann Catherine Griffin. And she has been a classroom teacher. She's a classroom teacher right now, but she's also worked at the university level. And she has mentored student teachers and clinical practices in her classroom. And she also has done this at the university level. So Ann Catherine has some great tips for all of you. And she said that how she always begins is looking to see where the teacher is in the beginning. What's the baseline data she can get on that teacher? What do they already know how to do so that she can build on that and make them even stronger? And she thinks a lot about the model that she presents. She tries to be positive. She tries not to talk negative about teachers. She tries to model the correct language and terminology that we should be using. And she really thinks about what she's doing so that the teacher can imitate the behaviors that she has. She always tries to be positive and encouraging and always smile and even take time to laugh about things before you get down to the nitty-gritty serious part that needs to be improved. She always models respect for her students. So if she's out in the teacher's lounge, she talks about her students with respect in front of others if she mentions them. She tries to show respect for families when they come in for meetings, and she models this for people that she's mentoring. She says that she likes to communicate through her actions as well as through her words, but she also always gives written recommendations to every teacher, and she tries to be really clear and concise about what she thinks a good teacher should do. You'll see MSD written here, which is low incidence disabilities, those students with moderate and severe disabilities, and that's her area of expertise. And she feels strongly that we have an obligation as teachers to be the best that we can be and to train the best to follow us that we can be, so that special education will continue to be strong over time, long after we've left the field. So now we're up to pathway 4. And this is one that may take some of you out of your comfort zone a little bit, and that's getting in front of people and doing professional development seminars or doing consultations with other teachers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. And first, again, you have the knowledge to do this already. You already have the experiences. You're ready to give advice to other people, especially if you're a mentor, you've had some practice with that. You know what works, what doesn't work. You know what evidence-based strategies are. And you want to have really strong services for students with disabilities. So you know that you could do that by maybe providing some training for other teachers, or maybe giving consultations for other teachers. And this can be informal or it can be formal. But you have a desire to improve services overall, and that's why you would think about it. You also understand that everyone needs continuing education. Even the best teacher and the best leader needs continuing education. I often go to conferences just so that I continue my own education. You know how to create presentations already for professional development, because think about what you do when you develop lesson plans. You know how to write objectives. You know how to task analyze things into a sequence of what you're going to do first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and you know how to collect data to see if it's effective. The same thing applies to professional development. And you also have consultation skills because, as we mentioned earlier, as a special ed teacher, you know how to collect and analyze data and how to come up with the best solutions to problems. So let's pause and reflect for just a few minutes again. I'd like you to reflect about professional development first, and then I'm going to give you a few seconds to reflect on consultations. But think about professional development that you've attended. The most recent one you went to, was it helpful or not? Was it research-based or not? Was it relevant to what you do in your classroom or not? If it was a great professional development, then why? How was it presented? Was the presenter effective in the way they presented information to you? And if you think it wasn't that great of professional development, how could it have been improved? I'll give you a few seconds to look to this before we move on to consultations. All right, reflect too on consultations. I want you to reflect on advice you've received from other people. It may have been someone who worked with you formally in a relationship to consult with you, or it may have been informal, just talking with another teacher down the hall on what might work for your students. So how did the consultant gather information on the problem that you had? Did they give you good advice, and was it based on the research? Did they give you verbal as well as written advice? And did they give you extra resources or model things for you? And did they follow up? And if they did, how often or when? So think about that for a few seconds, please. All right, so let's look at guidelines first for professional development. If this is an area you think that interests you and you haven't done it, but you're interested in it, you want to always, when you do professional development, be organized, have clear objectives. You're going to jot down how long it's going to take you to do the presentation, and you figure that out by practicing ahead of time. And you want to have everything in a logical sequence that you're going to do. The best way to do this is to think about the best speakers that you've heard and how they present the information to you. You want to make sure that you know your topic thoroughly, that you have the research to back up what you say, and as a teacher, bring lots and lots and lots of examples. If you're talking about a communication device, bring communication devices. If you're talking about lesson plans, bring examples of lesson plans, but have lots of examples, and then vary your presentation. You always want to vary it between lecture, activities, video discussion so that people aren't always watching the same thing. Today, we're probably going through a lot of me talking to you, but I'm hoping to give you time to reflect a little bit too and have discussion at the end of this webinar. If you are doing PowerPoint slides, don't overwhelm people with the information you put on them. Have minimal slides that are really clear in as few words as you can say it. Don't even use complete sentences, just points that you want to talk about. And then practice for someone else before you go and actually do the professional development so that somebody else can say, yeah, that was great, but you might improve by doing this or that. If you are asked to do a consultation, whether informally or formally, always gather information first. Look at data, talk to the students in the classroom, observe in the classroom, and then think about what kind of advice might you give. And make sure that any advice you give has research to support it, that you can role model what you're suggesting that someone else do, and that you lead by giving some written and face-to-face directions, and then you follow up. So let's take this to a higher level. If you've already done some workshops for your school or for parents or for your staff, if you've already done some informal consultations, what else might you do to become a real leader in this and people look to you for guidance? If you're looking at professional development, volunteer. Go to your school and tell your principal that, I was at a conference and I saw a really good procedure, or I read a book and read about something I really tried in my classroom that worked well. And I'd like to volunteer to share that with teachers in the school or in our district. I applied to present at conferences. Many of you are going to have a state CEC conference or even a local CEC conference that you might be able to attend. Or it might even be a local group. It might be that there is a women's club or a Lions club that you want to talk to about maybe community-based instruction. It might be that you have a group like Down Syndrome Society or Autism Society that you can talk to parents. But apply to do those presentations for other people. Volunteer and let them know that you're willing to do it. Also, if you have access to a university, tell them that you'd like to come talk to a class. Maybe you'd like to come talk to a student teaching seminar before people get out into the field. Or you'd like to talk to a class that's talking about behavioral methods and you can share what works for you. If you think about doing consultations with leadership, what you want to realize is that this can be informal or formal, and you want to let the administrators know that you're willing. Say, I've got some great behavioral strategies that work with my students, and we're getting ready to include a lot of these students into regular ed classes. And I'd really like to be a resource for the other teachers and float around to the rooms and talk to them about how to best work with the students that are going to be in their classroom. And you can also go a step further in consultations by going into online chat groups. There are a lot that are set up for teachers. Council for Exceptional Children and TASH both have websites for teachers. And you can get on there and meet other teachers, and they may be posing problems that they need some help with. And you may be able to consult with them from a distance and offer suggestions. A really good professional person that I know is Sally Miracle. And Sally is great at doing professional developments and as a consultant. And she began as a secondary special ed teacher. And while she was a teacher, she developed a peer tutoring program for not just her school, but the entire district. And now she has moved on to working regionally with all the special education teachers in low incidence within her state. And she goes in and does workshops for them and does consultations for them. And here's Sally's advice. When I ask her about professional development, Sally says, if you're doing a professional development, never ever read your slides. The people viewing the presentation can read them or they can get a handout later, but talk. Just talk about them. And don't ever talk for more than 30 minutes without stopping for an activity or some kind of discussion. She said, share as many personal stories as you can. Even when you weren't successful, tell what didn't work as well as what did work in your classroom. And never just think about lecturing and telling people what to do, but talk with people, listen to people, and share with people. Give them an opportunity to share with you too. And if you're being a consultant, She said, never go into a classroom blaming a teacher for what's going on wrong in that classroom, because they're going to become defensive and not want to listen to you. But instead, approach the teacher by saying, how can I help you be more successful with these students? I'll be glad to give you any advice that I can think of. And show a lot of respect for that teacher, because you want them to respect you in turn, and try to influence them to change the way maybe they're doing something rather than to tell them to do it or to be more threatening. So if you think that's a way that you might have leadership, I hope you got some ideas. And the next one is one where I think all of you are working. Everybody on this webinar has probably worked with families at some point or other. And if you're doing regular meetings, you're working on IEPs with families. And we want to think how to be the most effective person we can be when we're working with families. Why do we work with families? Because we know it benefits the child with disabilities. That parents can help us select the goals and activities and objectives that are appropriate for students in our classroom. They can tell us about cultural differences or their values that we need to think about as we work with students. We know that when we teach parents how to do procedures and they can do them at home, that we're going to increase the amount of learning that students get. We know that when we teach them behavioral interventions, the behavior can get better at home too if they know how to follow through. We know about services that families may need to get in touch with. We know about how to be good communicators and that there's more than one way to communicate with people, and that really communication goes two ways, that we should be listening to families at the same time we expect them to listen to us. So I want you to reflect for just a moment about the families that you've worked with. And on this, think about the last meeting that you had with a family of a student with a disability. What was the purpose of the meeting? Who was at the table? What went well in that meeting and what did not go so well? What were some of the cultural influences at play during that meeting, if there were any? What mode of communication did you use to talk with the family? Did you need an interpreter? Did you use some written communications as well as talking with them? Did you accomplish the purpose of the meeting? And if you did, great, but if you didn't, why didn't you? And did you make plans to follow up or not? So pause and think about that meeting for just a few minutes or a few seconds. All right, so let's look at guidelines. When we work effectively with families, here are the things that we do. We make sure that we're efficient in meeting times because families have a lot on their plates, and we want to make sure that it's convenient for them, that we don't take too much of their time up, and understand that they have a lot of issues going on in their life besides the child that you're talking to them about. You want to find ways to overcome cultural and communication barriers or issues. So you may take a little brainstorming to do this, but think about it ahead of time. And if you're having issues with a child in your classroom, don't blame the family for those issues unless you have data to prove that they're the cause. Otherwise, think we just got to work together to solve the problems for this child. All right, set up a goal for every meeting. Try to make it as positive as it can for that family. Say, I'm going to be reinforcing, I'm going to listen to them. And always listen, and listen with respect before you speak. Find ways to be respectful of a family's time and their obligations so you start promptly and you end promptly. Always have resources for the family that you can share with them, whether it's a website or a book or a manual. And always set an example for other people in your classroom, in your school, by how you work with families, so that you're never condescending or talking about families in a negative way, but you're always portraying families in the most positive light that you can when you're in front of other people. And if we want to be a real leader in working with families, let's take it up a notch. Let's make sure that we don't just have meetings in school, but we think about that family and where might be a better time. Maybe a neutral ground like a public library. Maybe you go into a family's home if the family invites you there, not if you just think you should be there. That you look at times, and it may be that you hold meetings early in the morning or late in the afternoon, or even in the evenings or on a weekend if that's best for a family. Whenever you have a meeting, you want to make sure all stakeholders are present. So if you need paraprofessionals there, if you need the student with a disability there, if you need a related service person there, you invite those people to be at the table. Make sure the meeting purpose is clear so that you don't stray off topic. Make it warm and welcoming. So you may want to think about bringing refreshments, bringing cookies, bringing donuts, and maybe even someone to play with children if they have to come along. Want to make sure that you've got the materials and resources to hand the family after the meeting, or that you follow up as soon as you can afterwards to get those materials to them. Also, always follow up with summary notes that you can send the family in writing. And consider offering workshops. This is really a notch higher for a leader. But if after a family meeting you find that they would really like to work on some behavioral strategies, or they might want to work on how to better communicate with social services, then you might consider setting up a workshop after school for the families to do that. Abby McCormick Evans is a teacher that's working with families now. And Abby's job is to be the school IEP facilitator. Like you, she was first a classroom teacher, and now she has really honed her skills on being effective on working with families. She conducts all the meetings for IEPs within her entire school. And here's what Abby would tell you that she's learned about working with families. She said, always before you go to a professional meeting, get to know them personally first. Know their first name, be able to approach them in the best way that you can, know a little bit about their background and where they're coming from. Always have a short summary of what the meeting's about that you can hand to them as they come in, or maybe even send it ahead of time. And make clear to families they can bring someone with them when they come to the meeting, especially if they're scared to talk out. It might be an advocate from a professional organization that comes along, or it might be a next door neighbor or a family member. Really think about how the family feels about the issues before you think about how you feel about it, because they may have different feelings. And try to be as compassionate as you can, but still hold parents accountable once the meeting's over for getting some activities done and getting back with you, or you're getting back with them on follow-up to see if what you suggested and talked about in the meeting really did work. All right, so really working with families goes right into our next path, and this is Leadership Path 6, when we're thinking about transition. And those of you who might be working with preschool or elementary, don't think this doesn't apply to you, because it does. We want to view transition as something that happens from birth all the way through adulthood. So why should you be working with students longitudinally through their entire life on transition? And one, we know it's good for the student and it's good for the family. And we can think longitudinally, and you should know how to do that. You should be looking at records and where did the student come from before I had them, and where do I expect them to go next, and where does the family want them to be when they're age 21. You should know a little bit about the family's values and cultures as a special education teacher. You should know a lot about options that families have, because families may not be aware of the least restrictive environments when their students go into, from elementary into middle school, or middle into high school, or even going into post-secondary placements. You should know that there are really good post-secondary education programs now for students with disabilities, and make families aware of them. And you should know about related services and services that you're going to need to access that are out in the community, as well as resources. So let's reflect on transition for a moment. And instead of thinking about your students, what I'd like you to do is think about your own life. And what was a really important transition that you had in your life? It may have been going from high school to college. It may have been deciding whether to become a parent or not, or whether to get married or not, or even whether to go through with a divorce. It may have been thinking about changing jobs or changing careers. Think about that transition. It could have been an illness even. What was a difficult period of transition for you, and what supports and strategies really helped you? Was your family involved in your transition as you made it? And now think about the person with disabilities. Did they have similar transitions that they're going through? And do their families have similar transitions? And what supports and strategies might be helpful to them that were helpful to you? All right, let's think about that for a few seconds, please. All right, let's look at guidelines. For people who are doing transition, those of you in secondary ed may know a lot of this already, but I want everyone to think about it, and think about it for the age of the student that you work with. We've already mentioned that transition is a lifelong process, so it occurs at every age. And we always want to support inclusive services and peer involvement from the earliest age possible, because someday when students transition to adulthood, they're going to be in inclusive environments, hopefully, and working with peers when there's no longer other support out there for them. All right, think about the transition services and options in your community, and don't limit yourself on thinking about what they are. When there are limited options, think about what the family really desires as an outcome and how could you possibly make that happen. Think about resources that you can compile to share with families. Be aware of that families may have cultural difference in you and value different things when their child transitions than you value as a teacher, and be respectful of that. Whenever possible, include the person with a disability in the transition meetings, as well as extended family members or caregivers or related service personnel or anyone from community services. And then we could do a whole lecture on this, but we won't. Be person-centered. Always put that person with a disability at the center of the transition meeting. What do they want for their lives? What does that person want? And how can we make them be a better self-advocate and a better voice for themselves as they transition, using self-determination strategies? All right, and if we take it up a notch to being the best transition specialist that we can be at any age for our students, whenever you hold some meeting, make sure that the partnerships are there, that anybody, even from the community, is there that could help out on transition for your student. Especially future teachers, if you're going to another school, if they're going to a college program, maybe having some professors come, but be open to open options for living and education employment. We're not thinking about here what you as a teacher think is best for the student, but we're really thinking about what the student and their family thinks is best. Once you make families aware of all the options, then it's up to them to decide. But you can help out with this by offering workshops. You can have workshops that you offer on social services and how to work with them, on how to get the health benefits you need when you become an adult, how to get guardianship as you turn 18 or 21, depending on your state, how to do in supported employment or post-secondary education and whether or not that's an option where you live. And at each meeting that you hold for transition, you should be able to have a goal for that meeting. You should be able to say who's responsible for meeting the goal and when we'll meet again to assess the progress. And then lead by offering up materials and resources. A great teacher doing transition is Renee Hollinger-Scott. And Renee was a secondary teacher and still is. She developed a special education program for secondary students from age 18 to 21 that had low incidence disabilities. And instead of holding this in the high school, she moved the program onto a university's campus near her school. And the students from 18 to 21 went to that campus every day, and they audited classes, they did community-based instruction, they did lessons in offices, and they held work jobs across the campus and in the community. So their whole day was spent outside the high school, just like other 18 to 21-year-old students would be. So Renee said, if you're thinking about developing some kind of transition program like she has, what you want to do is research similar programs and talk to the people who lead those programs. It may be that you read about one in a journal or online and you just can email that person and talk across the country. You want to learn what resources your community has to offer. So you're going to think about, funding sources. That parents are sometimes scared that their child will lose services if they start holding a job, and you need to find out about how you can work with families on that and maybe do supported employment. So what's available in your community and how do we make parents aware of it? And then give them this information and as many resources as you can to support them. All right, we're going on to Pathway 7 now, and this is one that's really dear to my heart. For the last few years, I've worked at a national level on advocacy, and I can tell you that's important in your own community as it is in your state and in your nation. So here's what all of you, and I hope every one of you will think about this, should advocate for your students. I've talked about the knowledge base you have and the expertise, but also you have personal stories and examples. And if you're going to be talking to a legislature and really changing policy in special education, then they're going to want to hear those personal stories that you have to tell. And all of you out there have stories that I don't know about and that I don't have, but they can be effective when a legislator's listening. You have a voice that can change things, but you also have a voice for the families and students in your classroom that maybe don't exercise advocacy, and you can speak out for them as well. And every legislator realizes that you hold a vote, and that's important to them, so they really want to listen and be attentive to what you have to say. And understand that while you're just one person, if you align yourself with a professional organization, you're going to have many people talking the same way. So pause and reflect for just a few seconds on this. Think about an issue in special education that's really, really important to you and that may be even controversial right now. What examples have you got that show how important that issue is from your own classroom? What are the laws and policies that are out there that already support this issue? What research supports your stance on the issue? And how do you think you might be able to do change at the local level, the state level, or even the national level? What groups are there that you might align yourself with to do that? Jot down your ideas, please. All right, I'm going to put a plug in for the book right now because in the book I list all of the professional organizations for you that do advocacy. So that might be something of interest to you, but you can also find these groups online. So here are some guidelines if you're an advocate for your students. Always research the issue and have the examples that support your stance. Align yourself with some professional organization. It might be a civic organization like the Lions Club or the Kiwanis Club in your community, or it may be a professional organization like the Council for Exceptional Children or the Down Syndrome Society. You want to know who the administrators are in your state and federal office, and all you have to do is go online and type in state legislators, and you're going to get a list of them, as well as how to email them and their phone numbers. You can do the same thing at the federal level to know who your state senators are, especially if they sit on a committee or not. Their websites will tell you if they're involved in educational policy or not. And recognize that as a private citizen, you have a right to speak out on any issue that you want to speak out on. Realize that you're not speaking out for your school, so you don't want to use your school stationery or school email, but privately you can talk to any legislator and say, I am a classroom teacher, and this issue is important to me because, and you can tell them why. All right, when you're advocating, don't talk and ramble on forever, but be concise and clear. And if you're doing an email, just a few examples and telling why it supports, you support a certain issue. And then be aware that whenever you speak out, you're being a role model for the students in your school, for the students with and without disabilities, and for their families. And you're also speaking out with your colleagues on issues. So let's see how we can be more of a leader in this area of advocacy. One is to write letters. There are newspapers all have a place for you to write letters to the editor and to talk about issues that are going on, and you can do this as a private citizen anytime you want. You don't have to sign your school's name at all to this. Just educate people through your letters to the editor. Also think about email to legislators to tell them about issues that are important to you, or even call them. They'll take your call. And don't expect to talk to the legislature in person, but you will have an educational policy person in that. Every single legislator's office has this, and ask to speak to that educational policy person. If you have a local office of your representatives in your community, think about visiting it. And if you happen to be planning a trip to your state capital or to Washington, D.C., maybe doing a vacation there, don't hesitate to go in and talk with people in that office, because that's why they're there. They always have people there to greet you, talk with you, and take notes on what you want to share with the legislator. Before you raise any issues, make sure that you can also offer up solutions to go along with those issues. So if you say it's difficult to teach standards, then tell what a solution to that problem is. Or if you're saying it's difficult to do inclusion, tell what the solution is to that problem. All right, build the relationships with legislators by communicating pretty frequently. Every time there's an update, something current you want to share with them, a new example comes up, send an email or a call again, and they're going to understand that you do this often enough to call you back on occasion. I've done this for years, and I've had 2 occasions where one of legislators' staff came to visit me and another where they called up and asked my opinion on something. And they'll do that for you too, because I guarantee you a teacher's word is more important than a professor's word. All right, be a resource for all policymakers. Tell them you're willing to do this, and keep abreast of what's going on with policy by subscribing to listservs or tweets that may keep you informed. Attend professional meetings that are in your local area, or join an advocacy group in your local area. If you don't have a local area, join a state or national group and get online with them. And then teach the students that you work with how to be advocates as well, how to speak out for something, teach them how important it is to vote, teach them how important it is to have a voice in their lives. All right, an example here is not an interview, but actually a newspaper article that you could Google about Sarah Minla Dutray. And I know Sarah, and Sarah is just a wonderful person who is a special education classroom teacher, but she has also worked for the U.S. Department of Education. So she really knows Washington, D.C. and the ins and outs of that, even though she no longer lives there. Sarah is a mother of a child that has a disability, and she's also the daughter of a state legislator. And just last week, I was communicating with Sarah and found that she ran for the local school board in the town where she lives, in the city where she lives. And that really shows what an advocate Sarah is for students. She wants to represent them on the school board too. So here's Sarah's story, and it is a story of success. Sarah had a daughter who was born with CMV. And I'm not even going to try to give you the long pronunciation for CMV, but you can Google this and find it online. But it's a virus that children get prenatally, and when they're born, it can result in severe disabilities. And in Sarah's case, her daughter was born with deafness. So she now has a cochlear implant, but Sarah's thinking, you know, how could I have avoided getting CMV? And when she did the research, she found out that it would have been really simple to take some simple precautions during her pregnancy so her child would not have contracted CMV and resulted in the deafness. So she went to the legislators. She emailed them, she wrote them, she called them, and she told her story. I'm a mother, I'm also a teacher in special education, and here's something that all parents need to know. She was so successful in her advocacy that now the state where she lives has a law that actually says that you have to give precautionary information to women in pregnancy about CMV and how to avoid getting it, and also to screen all newborns to see if they have it so there can be an intervention before it progresses and the condition gets worse. So since Sarah did this in her state, I've been contacted by her mother just recently that other states that probably many of you live in are also enacting similar legislation due to Sarah just calling up a legislator and saying, hey, listen to my story. All right, now we're up to the final leadership path, and this is connecting with disability-related organizations. And as I said, you can be an advocate. One person can have an important voice. But if you put your voice with lots of people in a professional organization, you can have the voice of many influencing policy. But there are other reasons to belong as well. So professional organizations allow you to get the most current research possible. They have materials that are often free. Sometimes you have to pay a fee, but they still may give a discount for teachers. They have professional development activities, like TASH is now doing regional conferences on different topics for teachers. Professional organizations, excuse me just a moment. Professional organizations all support advocacy activities. So the larger the organization, more likely they are to have someone in Washington, D.C. that speaks to legislators. But they're also going to be active at the state level. And you may even go to a professional organization in your own town or city where you live. You may talk to the local board of supervisors or the board of education or to the mayor. And if you have a professional organization speaking with you, they're going to listen. And so think about organizations that might be in your town, whether they're civic organizations or professional organizations, local teacher education society or autism society in your town, or even a women's club or some kind of men's club. All right, when you network with people in your profession, it always makes you a stronger leader and gives you good ideas. And they like hearing from you too. You can always share the research and strategies that work for you with other people through a professional organization. And you can always take information from professional organizations back to the classroom for the students you're working with and to their families. So I want you to reflect just a moment again. This is our 8th time to reflect on a professional organization that you've been involved with. What were the advantages of it? Did you get to go to conferences? Were there materials they published? And what were the disadvantages? Did they meet somewhere that you couldn't attend meetings, or was the cost too high? And was the organization active at the local level in your community, at the state level, or the national level, and how? How large was that organization? What kinds of activities did they promote? Did they promote inclusion? Did they promote behavioral strategies? And in what way could a member participate? If you as a classroom teacher, what was your option to participate in that group? And was it beneficial for you? So please think about this for a few seconds. Okay, I hope all of you have got a lot of notes now where you've been thinking about different paths and how these best work for you. So let's look at this final path. All right, do an internet search for disability related organizations if you don't know who they are. All of you should know CEC, the Council for Exceptional Children, because it's the largest group. But there are going to be others, and you may have groups on behavior or on autism or on Down syndrome that you especially want to contact. Look up those groups on the internet, find out about them, see what they offer. Some of them are going to be free. See if they give discounts for teachers, if they send out free materials or things that you want to buy for your classroom, if they offer webinars, and then weigh out if it's going to be worth the cost for you. Then see if there's a local chapter in your area where you can actually attend a meeting, or if you'll need to get online to do this. Read about the organization's accomplishments. And a real grassroots organization that's been really important in special ed is the ARC, which used to be known as the Association for Retarded Citizens. Now they're just known as the ARC. And the ARC is the reason we have any special education law now. The parents and teachers got together, went to Washington, and they talked to legislators until the laws got passed. So that just shows how important a professional organization can be. Know about the quality of the organization you're working with. Do they base what they do on research? And the purpose of the organization. Is it to work with families? Is it to work with teachers? Is it to work with administrators? And then look at how you can be active. It might be online, or it might be going to a local meeting. And if you want to take it up a notch to be a really good leader, all right, apply for that organization, attend a meeting, even if you have to drive somewhere to it or get online to do it, and volunteer. All organizations have committees. They might be planning an event like a Down syndrome society does a buddy walk, and you might volunteer to be on the buddy walk committee. All right, if there's an opening on the board, volunteer to do that. You know, be a secretary if you don't feel like you want to lead the organization, or just a board member. Participate in face-to-face or online special interest groups. You'll usually find that there are people who like to get together and chat about behavioral strategies, or chat about inclusion, or chat about standards and curriculum. Participate in any advocacy activities that organization does. So if they're doing a letter writing campaign, you do the letter too. And if they give you a letter just to sign, make sure you personalize it before you sign it and send it off. If there's a rally being held in your community or at your state capital, go to that rally and be part of it. And as I mentioned earlier, make office visits whenever you can. All right, if you want to do something a little bit out of your comfort zone, think about submitting proposals to present your classroom strategies at a conference. You might present it just with a local organization that works with parents, or you might do it at the state CEC conference. And also follow the guidelines for doing written pieces as well. So you might see that your organization does newsletters, and you could write a column for other teachers. Or they might have a listserv where you can put out a message for other teachers. Or it might actually be a professional article that you're going to work with maybe one of your professors on doing. Here's an example of a teacher who has really been active in disability-related organization. And this is Samantha Matthews Oruela, And Sam was active when I had her as a student and afterwards when she was a teacher in the Down Syndrome Society in the state where I was working at the time. And she volunteered to be on the board. She had several students in her classroom with Down syndrome and thought that she could really connect with their parents through this organization and find out better ways to work with the students that she had. And she also has moved on now to be an adult service provider as well as a behavioral consultant. So here's advice from Sam. Sam says you pick an organization by what your disability calling is. So if you're interested in speech therapy, it's going to be some organization that addresses communication. If you're interested in challenging behaviors, then you're going to be an organization that really specializes in that. For me, the organization I belong to is TASH because I really focus on severe disabilities. She said, research that organization, make sure it does what it claims to do, and then let people know you're willing to be part of that organization. Join it, volunteer, become a board member if there's an opening. Sometimes you'll have to run for it, and sometimes you'll just be appointed. And make sure that you know what the mission is. Every single organization online, you can just click and it will say mission statement. Know what that mission is, and if it really is in philosophy of your own philosophy, you're in line together. And then think about the upcoming events that that group might have and see if you can participate in them. All right, so we have gone over 8 paths to special education teacher leadership, the way I see it and the way I've taught classes on leadership to the teachers I've worked with. If the teachers I worked with, we actually developed a leadership plan and they looked at a way they want to explore and something they want to do to become a leader. So I'm asking the same thing of all of you today. I know that all of you, as I said, have the background to be a leader. You already have the expertise. So I haven't talked about behavioral strategies. I haven't talked about communication strategies because you know that. That's your area. That's your expertise. You're the expert. You're in the classroom every day. You're working with kids. So you already know how to be a leader. You have that content people want. I've given you 8 ways you might take it up a notch to become a leader, recognizing that all of you have different talents, different abilities, and different interests. You may say, I could never speak in front of someone or write something professionally, but I'm a really good worker if there's an event coming up. All right, so I would like you to think about taking a leadership role that could make better special education services for others. So here's your challenge. Identify your leadership pathway. Think about 1 or 2 activities. Look at your reflections. What did you learn? 1 or 2 activities that you can do in that pathway you've selected to become a real leader. And keep the goal in mind that you're not doing this for yourself because you want people to look at you and admire you. The reason you're doing it is because it's going to benefit students with disabilities with whom you work and their families.
Again, I'd like to remind everyone that we're giving 20% off discount code for brookspublishing.com. You use it till December 31st. The code is edWebinar. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach us at brookswebmeeting@brookspublishing.com. And then we're going to go ahead and do the Q&A, and I'll leave this up here for everyone. So Dr. Collins, I'm going to read some of the questions that we've gotten submitted throughout the presentation today. Okay, so one of the first questions we received was, how can people outside of the U.S. help and be part of organizations that help with certain disabilities?
All right, good question. And I'm glad we have people outside the U.S. that are tuning in. And what I would tell you is that there are some organizations that are national. So the Council for Exceptional Children is a national organization. TASH is a national organization. If you go online, you'll find other groups that are national. I went to a special ed conference a few years ago, was at the International Special Education Conference. So there's a group that actually does that. And if you look at the Council for Exceptional Children, they have a branch called DICES, which is the Division of International Special Education. So if you'll just go online, you're going to find those national organizations that you can be part of.
The question was about helping bring parents on board when they are not able to cooperate. They're not willing to cooperate with the situation at hand.
All right, and here was my advice on that one. I don't think you all heard it, but I'm thinking about getting another family that took your advice and that is a good example and seeing if that family will be willing to be involved. So if you were trying to transition a student to supported employment and the family says, no, we want them in a sheltered workshop, I think if they meet another family that have done supported employment and it's worked for them, they're more likely to try it. So that's going to be my advice on that question.
Okay, wonderful. Another question we received also about parents is how would you recommend approaching parents that come to teachers with misinformation and want them to implement that misinformation with their child?
Oh, I've seen that happen so many times. And I tell them, let's look together. Let's go online and see what research we can find to support what it is you're saying. And maybe if you go online and find that what they're wanting to do is not research-based. I know I did a seminar on autism where we found about 50 different things online that are not research-based that do not work. And families were wanting to use those. And so basically we said, let's get online together and let's hunt the research. And we'll explain the difference between research-based practices and those that are not, and then show them maybe the options they have.
So everyone, one last time, I'd like to thank Dr. Collins, and thank you everyone who stayed on. I do know that we went over in time, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. I know you can be very busy during the school year. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So be sure to follow our community page, Teaching All Students, and stay up to date for when that next one will be. So we hope you have a wonderful day and try to stay warm out there. So goodbye, everyone.